Hey everyone, the Gloomhaven Digital devs have announced that they are going to be making some sweeping changes to the enhancement system, to potentially some of the options and optional things that you can play with when you do your campaign. That's going to bring it a little bit more in line with the board game, bring back some rules that people really miss, but also update some of the rule set to some Frosthaven rules, which I think is a really classy touch and obviously shows that they're listening to the fact that a lot of people would like to see some of these evolutions of the rule set put into this game. So let's get into it because there's a lot to talk about. Okay, so let's talk about enhancements because this is a big change. The first change that a lot of people are going to be, I think, very happy with. Personally, it didn't really bother me too much at the time, but they are bringing back persisting enhancements after retirement. So in the original board game, when your character retired, they would actually keep the enhancements that they have earned. And then if somebody wanted to play that character again, or if you wanted to roll that mercenary type again, then you would have those enhancements again. Now they are going to be bringing this in as a toggleable option. So when you start your campaign, you're going to have the option of either having persisting enhancements or potentially going with a rebalance of enhancements, which we'll get into in a second. But that's a really nice touch. I know a lot of people were criticizing the game for this and were missing this part, and this was something that they really enjoyed, and I think that's a nice touch. It's really important to say right here though, is the way the game is coded at the moment, when you go back to Gloomhaven after successfully completing your personal quest, you will immediately retire. There is no opportunity for you to sell all of your items and then do your enhancements and then retire like you would do necessarily in the board game. So you are going to have to be really careful about when you trigger this. You're going to have to make sure that you've sold all of your items, then maybe go and do a scenario, then come back to it or something like that. You're going to have to be very careful at the moment. Maybe they might be able to find a way to change this so that you do have that option in the future, but I think this is a step in the right direction for many people, and you just have to be aware of it. This does mean though that two personal quests in particular are a bit more tricky now, and if you wanted to go down this route, that being the have so much gold, I think it's have 200 gold, and the one that says to have lots of items, because of course you're going to need to have those items. It's going to need to happen in Gloomhaven for you to be able to trigger it. So you're not going to be able to sell those items before your optional retirement, if that makes sense. Maybe something will be changed there. Maybe they will add an extra step, but I still think this is a really good change and a lot of people are going to like it. Wasn't my personal taste, but I'm really excited about the next change that they're making, which is a complete rebalance if you decide to not go for this option. And I think this might be my preferred way to play going forward. If you decide to go down the route of having non-persistent enhancements, then the next big change is actually the cost of enhancements is being reworked completely and rebalanced, with many of the enhancements having their costs slashed, making them a lot more accessible and opening up some different build ideas and potentially making certain builds more viable, or potentially making it much more easy for you to be able to make that decision between an item and an enhancement. Maybe it makes a lot more sense. And I think this is a really good change. So I have already put all of this information into my Gloomhaven tools spreadsheet, which I will link down below in the description and in the pinned comments. So if you want to check out these differences for yourself, you can always check that out. But I wanted to go over just a few of the big changes, the big wins and the big losses, if you like. I don't want to go into every single character here because, well, we could be here a long time talking about the ramifications of this, and I'll probably do some future videos talking a little bit more about different strategies for enhancements now. But let's just go over what we've got and some of the big winners and the big losers. So the big winners here really are summons. So summons are going to have a lot more of an option maybe for you to be able to enhance them. Before, it was always a little bit difficult to do so. It was hard to get all of the gold. It didn't really make much sense. Whereas now I think it's actually pretty viable for a character to try and go for one or two enhancements on different summons. Before, you'd maybe have enough gold to enhance one stat on one summon. And now maybe you might be able to enhance a couple of summons. So maybe that might make a few characters a little bit better, or at least give them a little bit more flexibility and maybe a goal to shoot for by getting some gold. Might open up some new interesting build opportunities for certain summons as well. Summons that were maybe quite good, but maybe just on that fringe, they weren't quite good enough. Maybe with an enhancement, they'll now become good enough. So we'll definitely have to take a look at those. And also, I really like some of the changes to just the simple enhancements here. So move and attack coming down a little bit. Not really ones that you usually have. I usually end up putting like a +1 on something like a range. That's usually what I go for. That's come down a little bit here too, which is nice to see. But that's quite a common one that I would usually go for anyway. Also, things like additional targets is interesting. Reducing shield, I think, is also a really big deal, because now certain characters who maybe didn't want to spend all of the gold on shields, I mean, that's a big reduction. You might be able to now build certain characters into a little bit more of a tanky type character because you've got that opportunity with this. So really, really like some of these changes to just the +1s, because it's going to open up those opportunities maybe for certain characters who maybe want to just increase their shield, or maybe wanted to increase their push or increase their pull or do something like that. There's some sort of things for you to experiment here, and I really like this. And the cost is not really, you know, that obstructive really. It's going to be very easy to do. So I really, really like some of these changes to just the +1s. Let's talk about some of the big losers here though. Let's talk about Curse and Strengthen. So both of these have had significant increases. Strengthen has doubled pretty much in cost. In fact, it has exactly doubled in cost. Now this is pretty much just a straight big nerf to Strengthen in general, in line really with the prevalence of how easy it is to find dots to strengthen in Gloomhaven. In Frosthaven, they've actually adjusted this, so you're gonna be much less likely to see opportunities for Strengthen to be enhanced. It's not really going to be there because they've changed the enhancement system to the 3 different dot kind of system. So now there's 3 different symbols and only a certain symbol can go in a certain place. So they've managed to stop some of those shenanigans going on where funny enhancements find themselves in weird places that make them maybe a bit too good. So this does mean though that certain characters are going to really kind of lose out, I guess, or at least they're going to need to maybe rethink their order for buying things. So the big loser here really is the Spellweaver for this Strengthen, I think, from the starting mercenaries. They're not going to be able to get that Strengthen enhancement as quick as before. They're going to have to hold off, or perhaps maybe even consider some additional enhancements instead. That does open up your possibilities. This is going to be really interesting to see what people go for, because there's going to be now much more value in lower kind of cost enhancements than there was before. Before, the lower cost enhancements were still quite a lot of gold, and really you'd be like, well, is it better for me to do that or just buy a really good item, save up and try and find a really good item, or potentially save up for a really big one? Now I don't think you necessarily maybe need to be so sort of cut and dry with it. You can actually think about these things and tailor them a little bit more to what you're doing and have a bit more freedom to experiment, because you should be able to get gold pretty reasonable, even on normal difficulty. If the gold piles are, let's say, 2 gold per pile, you're playing on normal and you've just started out, you should probably be able to come out of most scenarios with between 6 and 10 gold. And if you see that, you're going to be able to, within a couple of scenarios, you should be able to get some of the more basic enhancements. I do think this means that you're going to want to rush Frozen Hollow, even more so than maybe you were already. If you've been playing the campaign, you should just play all of the campaign missions until you get to Frozen Hollow. Do Frozen Hollow, get enhancements unlocked early. That's going to be a big power spike now because the costs have come down. So you're going to be able to buy some maybe even straight away if you don't spend any money from the initial kind of few scenarios that you do, and you're going to be straight away in there and being able to enhance stuff. That's really, really cool. So really like these changes too. Another big winner here, I think, is Poison. Poison has come down quite a lot, and now it's actually different. So before, a lot of these were all the same costs regardless of what it did, and now actually they've been adjusted. So Wound and Poison were the same before, but now they've actually been sort of different. Price has been sort of changed just so that it kind of reflects really the power level, because if there was a choice between Poison and Wound, players are more likely to pick Wound because it's kind of guaranteed damage, really. Yes, it can be healed off easier, but on certain enemies that really doesn't matter, and you'd rather just have that guaranteed 1 damage from that wound. Doesn't really matter if you miss if they're wounded, right? The devs have done all of these changes in collaboration with Isaac, the game's designer. So this does have that rubber stamp of approval from them. It's not them making sweeping changes and going sort of out on their own to do this adjustment. This has been approved by Isaac and with other people in the sort of Frosthaven team and the Gloomhaven team. They've all taken a look at this, and this is what they've come up with to better kind of reflect where enhancements probably should be. This isn't going to be the same as Frosthaven. I think that's worth also me saying here. People might see this and think, oh, is this going to be what Frosthaven's like? I don't necessarily think that's the case. This is just balanced to Gloomhaven. These new enhancement costs will be on automatically if you continue on with your current campaign. Eventually they will become the new norm in that mode, if you like. The only way to access the old version is going to be by creating a brand new save, unfortunately. So if you are holding off creating your campaign because you would like to play it as the kind of hardcore old version with the old rules, then if you were to create a campaign now, it's worth bearing in mind that you will not be able to convert that version over to the persisting ability version once that comes out. Also coming as a option is going to be the reduced randomness variant, which is something that I know a lot of people who have commented on my YouTube videos before have said that it'd be really cool if they added it to the game. What this does is this actually removes every player's ×2 and their miss from their decks, so that you cannot do that, and they will actually replace them with a +2 and a -2 respectively. So what it does is it takes away some of that swingy nature of the game. It does exactly the same for the monsters too, so those monsters won't be able to crit you so much. It does make some of the things sort of like not quite as dangerous, as useful, of course. So when you look at something like a Iron Helm, you'd have to like house rule Iron Helm, I suppose, a bit differently, so that it would just give you a +0 and a -2. Actually, maybe would make that item a little bit better, because it would be 2 cards that it would affect rather than 1 card in the enemy deck. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how Iron Helm is reworked or thought about it in this way. But anyway, I think it's a good thing for a lot of people. It's something that people wanted, the devs have listened, and they're adding it to the game. Some Frosthaven rules are going to be kind of implemented, or kind of partially implemented. Some of these are sort of house rules as well for regular Gloomhaven, but we're going to have some of those brought across as well to maybe make things a little bit more in line with what the current rule set's going to be. So the first thing is summons. So one thing that I know a lot of players have been really wanting is the ability to be able to control summons in those ambiguous moments. So at the moment, there's no player control over ambiguity in digital, which in particular really does hurt summoning characters. There's some argument to be said that perhaps for enemies, players shouldn't have control over ambiguity, because maybe it makes the game a little bit too easy at times for you to be able to control the enemies even more. However, when you talk about your own summons, it can be very frustrating for particular characters when they sit there, do nothing, or they just don't actually go to the hex that you want, and sometimes that can really upset those characters. So we haven't quite got a option for players to choose ambiguity yet. Perhaps maybe there'll be some news on that coming at some point. But however, they are going to implement the Frosthaven rule, which is if there is no enemy for the summon to focus, then instead on their turn, they're going to focus the actual summoner, so the person who summoned them, and then they will actually move towards them as their point of focus. Now, this is the Frosthaven rule for how summons will act when there's no enemies on the board, and I think this is a really nice thing. Will potentially stop a couple of summons that get maybe summoned in the first room just getting stuck really far behind, because you summon them towards the back of the room, then you kill all the enemies and they're still at the back of the room, and then you have to go all the way to open the next door, and if they've only got like move 2, then won't move. So I think this is a really nice thing, a really nice quality of life thing. Will certainly help them, but it's sort of like a partial fix for now, in my opinion. I would really like to see whether or not they can find a way to make players be able to do that ambiguity thing with summons, because then that really does, I think, solve all of those issues. But this is a great first step, so really good to see. Line of Sight is getting updated to the Jaws of the Lion / Frosthaven new rule set, or at least kind of in spirit it is. What the devs are doing is they're adding an additional point in which you can trace line of sight to the middle of every hex. So in Gloomhaven, the original rules, and as it is at the moment, is that you must draw a line from the edges of the points of the hexes, if you like, and you cannot draw from a wall, which is really where the difficulty comes. So you can't start with a point that's on a wall. There are some hexes, I believe, one in particular in Burning Mountain. There's another one in another mission where you basically, by the rules, can't actually get line of sight from that hex to anything, because all of the points of the hex are actually adjacent to a wall. So it's very, very niche sort of situation, but pretty bad. But also, I think sometimes when you're playing digital, because of all of the kind of environments that they've built, you know, they look graphically very nice, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to know whether or not you have line of sight. And they've now changed this. As a reminder, you can hold down L and just drag around using that hotkey to be able to check line of sight whenever you want. So expect to see that there will actually be a new point in the middle of the hexes, which will make it much more similar to Jaws of the Lion, which allows you to trace from any point within the hex. And Frosthaven has that rule too, and it will pretty much in spirit be that rule. So that should now function pretty much mostly like that. So that's a really good change, and I think that will stop a lot of confusion as well with just weird line of sight stuff that sometimes happens, which isn't really intentional, but was just a finicky thing with some of the rules. And another huge one that they are going to be changing, and boy am I happy about it, and I think everybody should be, is they are changing the rolling advantage and disadvantage rules to the new Frosthaven rule set. So if you're new and you're unaware of this problem, you've never played the board game, or perhaps you haven't found it yet if you're playing digital for the first time, rolling modifiers are perks that different characters get, which give them a card that when drawn, they need to draw an additional card, or they keep drawing until they stop drawing a rolling modifier. These can be really good because you can get additional damage this way. So rolling +1 damage is quite a common card. You can get stuns through this way. There are lots of things you can do. Rolling elements some characters get, and they vary in strength. But there was one big problem that they always had, and that was because strengthen is a very, very powerful thing in the game. Being able to get advantage on attacks is great. And the way that strengthen would work with rolling modifiers is they would just count as a regular card and would be used in addition to the other card that you were drawn. So you would only draw 2 cards. You will only draw 2 cards. And if you were to draw a rolling +1 and your miss, you would actually have to add that +1 by the rules to that miss. And +1 plus a miss is still a miss. So with rolling modifiers in your deck, there was still the potential there that you could miss on an attack, which is really not what the spirit of being strengthened is. It's really about being able to make sure that you land that attack, or being strengthened and an advantage, of course. Like, that's the whole point of why you have those abilities, is to get advantage so that you don't have to miss. So it was a very annoying thing, and actually made a lot of people pause when taking rolling modifiers. And especially if you've played the game for a long time, you're very experienced, you would definitely be less incentivized to take some of those on certain characters because it was quite dangerous, especially if they really, really lent on strengthen as a core mechanic of what it is that they were doing, or advantage as a core mechanic of what they were doing. And yeah, it just made them almost unplayable at times, or at least not a good feeling when playing them. So how the new rule works is if the first card that you draw when having advantage or disadvantage is a rolling modifier card, you're going to continue drawing until you draw a non-rolling modifier card. Then you're going to draw 1 additional card after that and disregard any rolling symbols that that card may have. Then you're going to compare between those 2 cards. So the additional card that you had to draw, which you disregarded the rolling on, and the last card that stopped all of the rolling modifiers before it. Compare those. Now, if you have advantage, you're going to take the best of those 2 cards and then apply all of the rolling modifiers that you drew to do that. If you have disadvantage, you're going to take the worst of those 2 cards, disregarding any of those rolling modifiers that you have. Now, while this doesn't really protect you from maybe being cursed a bunch by the enemy when you have advantage, because there is still the possibility that you could draw multiple curses as those last 2 cards. You could draw 2 curses, or your natural miss and a curse. That's still possible, but you know, that's part of playing Gloomhaven. But what this does mean now is that you don't have that problem of maybe rolling that +1 into the miss and then having to add it. So really, really nice change. This is kind of like a house rule, or it's been kind of like a worked on house rule. A lot of people had different variants of this for the original game, where they kind of got to the same kind of result, but this is kind of like what the official rule is going to be going forward. And this is a really, really good change. I really did not expect them to actually implement this into Gloomhaven Digital. I thought it would either be too hard, or you know, they had maybe other things they wanted to do first. I'm really impressed that they've actually decided to do this. I think this is a huge change. This opens up so much more potential for different builds, different ideas of what you want to go for. It makes certain perks now actually really desirable on certain characters. I think some big winners of stuff like this is going to be like the Scoundrel, for example, someone who has a very thin deck who could draw potentially a lot of modifiers, but there was always that risk that you might draw that miss at the end of it when you had advantage, right? So certain characters are really going to benefit from this. And now I'm really starting to think that most of the rolling modifiers could come into the conversation. Now, things like rolling pushes, rolling pulls, and some others are still going to be a little bit underwhelming, but certainly those rolling +1s are now going to be really desirable for a lot of characters. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the devs actually implement any more of the Frosthaven changes. I mean, there's not loads more that I think would be applicable, but the push-pull one would be great. If you want to check out my link up there for a video that I did, which actually details all of the known changes. There might be a few more changes that are known now since that video went live, but a lot of the information there is good. So you can check that out. There's some other things in there that maybe we might see now, because there's now hope. I didn't honestly think that was going to be the case, but now I'm kind of hopeful with this change. Maybe we're going to see some more. And for me, that push-pull one, I would love to see that. And it wouldn't be, hopefully, too hard for the guys to implement either. I also want to add a little caveat here, though, that all of these are going to be toggleable options from what I understand. So if you don't like these and you want to play the game as it was intended, then absolutely you can do that. So that's really cool as well. I think it's really nice that the devs are just adding that as an option rather than forcing players maybe to do it. But I think most players are probably going to really like this change and be receptive to it. And finally, they've just mentioned a few small UI changes that are coming to the game, just some quality of life stuff, just to make it look a little bit nicer or make things a bit easier for players to read. First one being that character gold is going to be actually shown on the share gold screen. So at the moment, when the party is faced with having to split gold, it doesn't tell you how much gold each character has. So when you're playing in the board game environment, sometimes it's nice to say, wow, I have less gold than other people. Is it okay if I have some more? And yeah, you could just look down at your character sheet and see how much gold you had, and then you could argue with your friends if you deserved it or not. So now it's cool that actually that information is going to be there, so it's going to be visible to all players. So that's really, really cool. They're also going to make it a lot easier for you to tell whether or not a completed scenario still has a chest in it that you have not opened, which I think is quite cool, because sometimes the first time you complete a scenario, maybe you don't go for a chest because you think you can't go for it, or it's too difficult, you're going to lose the scenario, and you don't want to lose the scenario just to grab a chest. And now you're actually going to have that more signposted, so that if you did want to go back to try and complete that mission, or just jump in, run and get the chest and maybe abandon, it's going to show you, so you don't have to try and remember where all of the chests are that maybe you've left if you wanted to go back. They're also going to better improve the user experience with tracking personal quests, in particular some of them that require you to do very specific things, so that should be a bit more visible to players and it will actually be tracked within the game much more clearly. They're changing the screen a little bit for when you are long and short resting to see all of your ability cards instead. At the moment, it's quite a common complaint that it doesn't give you all of the information in a really easy to read format, that when you want to try and long or short rest and work out what cards you've burned, you can't see everything. So they're going to be reworking that a little bit, which I think is really nice. And another small note, they're just changing the way that multiplayer ping works, so that you actually have to toggle something. You have to hold a button to actually click to ping. It also means now that you can ping on your own turn, which was always a little bit strange because you couldn't ping while you were trying to do something mid-action. You would just be controlling the action of your character. You could only really ping when it wasn't your turn. So now you can actually ping on your turn, and you can obviously stop players from accidentally misclicking maybe and doing lots of like weird, noisy, erroneous pings. So yeah, really good idea. Just a little quick update video because I really wanted to bring awareness to these changes and talk about them a little bit. I will probably end up doing a more in-depth video about the enhancements at some point, because I think that's changed quite a lot of potential opportunities for different builds for different characters. There's a lot of exploring to do, so maybe we'll do a video about that in the future. But I also just want to say, like, hats off to the devs for doing this. The game is now out. I don't know why I'm surprised, because they've been very receptive all the way through early access, working on the game, listening to the community, trying to make the best version of Gloomhaven that people want. And they've done it again. You know, they've really brought in a change here that's going to please both camps. If you are somebody who really wanted those old enhancement system, you've got it. If you really wanted to have the new system, but you didn't like the costs, or you're not really that worried about the old system, then you're going to have a better opportunity to play with enhancements too. And that's just a really good idea. And the rebalancing in general, as done with Isaac and the other guys in the Gloomhaven team, I think that's a really good idea, just to bring it more in line with what we've learned over time as the game has evolved. It makes a lot of sense because it's a video game, right? They can change things like this. And the fact that this isn't potentially the last update we're going to hear either. This is just what we've got coming in the immediate future before Christmas. So, I mean, that's pretty nuts that they're even going to potentially do some more things. So I think that really opens the door to these Frosthaven rule set. You know, is there going to be more Frosthaven style rules coming across? That would be really interesting to see. I hope so, but we don't know for sure. But I just want to say again, just hats off to them. Done an amazing job, and thank you personally from me for just working on the game really hard and listening to everybody and making these changes. It's just awesome. All right then, all that's left for me to say then is, of course, if you do enjoy the video, please do like and subscribe. I do really appreciate it. It helps me out so much on YouTube. Also come over to twitch.tv/mandatoryquest, where I stream Gloomhaven every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. We're actually playing with viewers multiplayer this Sunday. So when this video goes out, every Sunday from now on, we're going to be starting our multiplayer playthrough with viewers. So if you'd like to maybe play with me, you've got an option to do that too. We will be doing that on Sunday, so come hang out on a Sunday. Also, don't forget to join the Discord, where you can obviously ask any questions about rules or anything like that you want. And of course, my link to my Gloomhaven tool spreadsheet is down below for all of the resources and things that I've collected to help you play the game better. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.
I think still, yeah.
Oh,
Scout
that's the blessing from Jeff.
Yeah.
That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?